Hey Caitlin, let's take a look at your week 6 final project. I think a lot of the concerns that I had in the last assignment have been mostly been absolved in this drawing. I think clarity-wise, things ended up being, much more, I guess, clear than what I was worried about before. I think that the mountain range turned out well overall. I think the dragon, the skeleton dragon, ended up being a lot easier to read and tell what's going on with it, and the space itself feels to be broken up, I think, nicely. There are some areas where I think that could be pushed more, but on the whole, I thought you did a really nice job of it. For me, I think what I find more interesting than anything else is the mountain range, where you're going in with the darker values as you move back into space, and there's a nice sense of size change, overlap, and value application to everything kind of comes together. So that, to me, that it really ends up being a nice amount of depth. And when I visualize it without the knight and the dragon, it's still a very kind of impressive range of mountains, even though it is more generalized and cartoonified. I think it still works out really nicely. I almost wish we could see a little bit more texture in place with it, although I can see that becoming a hassle as it moves closer and closer to the dragon. But there is a certain kind of level of, I don't think unfinishedness, but just kind of level of low detail. And I think that you have snow caps, but there's not really a distinction between the snow and the base of the mountain. And there is a certain kind of generalization to it beyond it being kind of cartoonish that I'd actually like to see a little bit more specifics in terms of an actual texture itself. I think the dragon works out well, although I think shadows could be pushed a little bit more. I know you were saying you were worried about really kind of overloading it, but there are still a few areas like the rib cage that things get very confusing, and I think if you're able to make a slight distinction between the ribs that are further away than the ribs that are kind of closer to us, you would be able to get a little bit of a little bit more clarity going on. The shading overall is good, though. Things like the horn are really nicely done, where there's a highlight and a shadow. The neck has a highlight and a shadow. The shoulder blades, the same thing. So I think you're adding in enough detail, but I think there are certain areas where you've got wing tips kind of moving in along with the ribs, which all look the same, and there's a lot of ribs that kind of overlap, that having some distinction between one side of the ribs and the other could be very helpful. I don't necessarily think the knight needs to be more detailed. Yeah, I actually don't. I think it's fine. I think that especially if the dragon ends up being more of the focal point, I think it just depends on what direction you want this to go. The drawing to me seems more focused on the dragon than it does on anything else, because of the color, because of its size compared to everything else, and I think just in terms of the value range, having the lights and the darks creating more contrast and just a more three-dimensionally acute element. I just think that that's the choice that you made. I think if you did want this to be more involved and more of a focal point, then it is not working successfully. But I think if this is kind of your focal point and the main kind of thrust of the piece, then it is. I think it works out well. I wish I could see a little bit more color variation, things again like the mountains. I think the sky has a good color and pallor to it, and it actually ended up working out well. And I think the scene itself's got a really nice amount of depth, which is cool. Some good use of colored pencil and marker, and some decent kind of value ranges in place.